Council. I'll call it to order at 6:06 p.m. Getting a little late start, training on some new software. All alderpersons are present. Our first item is Pledge of Allegiance and a silence prayer in lieu of invocation. Okay, we're on to item 4, which is the oath of office for the city clerk, Jennifer Gossick.
Okay, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Jennifer M. Gossick,
I, Jennifer M. Gossick,
having been duly elected to serve as city clerk for the city of Wisconsin Rapids, do hereby solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Wisconsin, and will faithfully discharge the duties of said office to the best of my ability, so help me God.
So help me God. All right, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Shani Blazer,
I, Shani Blazer,
having been duly elected
to
serve as mayor
serve as mayor
for the city of Wisconsin Rapids,
for the city of Wisconsin Rapids,
do hereby solemnly swear
I do hereby solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and of the state of Wisconsin, and will faithfully discharge the duties of said office to the best of my ability, so help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Susan C. Schill,
I, Susan C. Schill,
having been duly elected
to
serve as city attorney
serve as city attorney
for the city of Wisconsin
for
Rapids,
the city of Wisconsin Rapids,
do hereby solemnly
do
swear
hereby solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and of the state of Wisconsin,
and of the state of Wisconsin,
and will faithfully
and
discharge
will faithfully discharge
the duties of said office
the duties of said office
to the best of my
to the
abilities,
best of my ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations. Okay, all the persons, come on up. All right, so please raise your right hands and repeat after me. So we're going to go one at a time with the names. So I, Dean Tannins. I, Tom Rayon. I, Dennis Holland. I, Patrick J. Delaney. I, J. Bempey. Having been duly elected to serve as alderperson for District 2 for the city of Wisconsin Rapids, do hereby solemnly swear
Next item of business is the election of the council president. What are your wishes?
I'll nominate Dean Veneman.
I'm Jay. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, if somebody wishes to make a motion of unanimous consent. And you gotta hit your buttons. A motion by Jay, seconded by Matt, to cast a unanimous ballot for Dean Veneman as council president. Not anymore. We wouldn't need to.
It could be private if you want it to be, but I
Oh.
guess you only have one. It's the only vote that can be secret, so it's up to you guys how you want to vote. I suppose if there's only one nominee, maybe that's a big deal, but otherwise you could write it to a private ballot. Anyone care?
You don't care? Okay. Please cast your ballots. It doesn't automatically pop open, huh? Motion carried, 8 ayes, 0 nays. We're on to item number 9, which is Mayor Blazer's appointment to standing committees of the Common Council. Which is, I was thinking. So yeah, once the committees meet, then I see it's item 10. So for Finance and Property, I have Jay Bemke, Matt Zacher, Dean Veneman. Public Works, I have Ryan, Sherry, Dennis. For Human Resources, I have Tom, Jay, and Patrick. So we're on to item 10 then, is the newly appointed committees will meet to elect a chair and secretary. If you guys want to do that. You want it? Anything but president.
Everything else is an open ballot. No, well, they would have to write, yeah.
Unless there are more than one.
Right.
What's that? We haven't gotten there yet. Next item. Hey, Kyle. No, it's the email I just got.
You guys also need to set your meeting days and times. Brian, you guys also need to set meeting days and times.
Okay. change that to vice chair.
Yeah, so we're gonna do that.
Yeah, we need to change that to vice chair. Yeah.
Yeah, so once all the chairs are assembled and they.
Maybe the second, the fourth, and the fifth.
Yes. I got the court, or I have the court schedule.
So first Tuesday, what, the same time? Is that 5 o'clock?
I didn't hear the date.
So it's the same as what it is right now.
Yes, why don't we, I want to just go in order. So Finance Committee is going to meet first Tuesday at 5 PM. Who's the chairperson? And the secretary? Me. Ryan, Public Works, are you, I hear your chair?
Yes.
And then
Sherry is secretary, and
Oh.
it's first Thursday
Sherry.
at 5.
first Thursday at 5.
Or is it the first Thursday, it's always the first Tuesday?
Yes, good point.
Yeah. You always want to keep it. The first Thursday, following the first.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
So they're up to final course and then.
First Thursday following first Tuesday. Following first Tuesday. And then Human Resources? Oh yeah, what time is that? Did you say 5? Finance is at 5, right? Human Resources, who's the chair? So Jay's chair. Who's secretary?
Patrick,
Secretary.
and we're gonna try and meet a little bit later in the afternoon, and I think that's gonna be kind of dependent on staff schedule, so I will get a hold of Ryan and see what we can do.
That's kind of a TBD.
To be determined. Okay. So that makes so legislative, well, no, it doesn't, we don't need a date or time on that, so that's, well, you got legislative committee's gonna have to choose a chair. So Matt Zacher, Ryan Austin, and Jay Bemke. Okay. You guys wanna determine a chair and a secretary for legislative committee?
I nominate Jay Bemke.
He's gonna be volunteered for secretary. Secretary. Okay. Oops, wrong. Okay, moving on to the election of an alderperson to the Plan Commission to serve a term expiring April 17th, 2023. Is it? Who's? Yeah, I'm planning. So Ryan's on there. Tom, are you on there, or you just come to the meetings? Okay. We have Ryan Austin nominated. Is there any other nominations? Sorry, Kyle, only one nomination. So anybody wish to make a motion for unanimous consent? So we have a motion, if you want to push your button, Dean. There you go, thank you. Seconded by Matt. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Seven ayes and one abstention. Congratulations, Mr. Austin. Election of the alderperson to the Park and Rec Commission to serve for the alderperson's term of office. It also further, yeah, we have Sherry as a nominee. Number 12. I was going to say later on, Tom's my appointment to the Park and Rec Commission. So we have Sherry as a nominee. Is there any other nominations?
I'll nominate Dean Veneman.
We have Dean Veneman as a nominee. Is there any other nomination? Okay, seeing none. Or we can just do a ballot, maybe. You got the paper, might as well use them. You have to use the one with your district on it, so you vote by district. It's a new computer. The new program is better. Maybe if you could pass it down to the clerk. Yeah, it's open vote.
District 6 voted for Dean.
District 2 is Dean. District 1 is Dean. District 3 is Dean. District 4 is Sherry. District 5 is Sherry. District 8 is Dean. District 6 is Dean. Do you have one? What? Did you read that one already? So you got that one. So 6-2, congratulations, Dean. Election of alderperson to the Waterworks and Lighting Commission to serve for the alderperson's term of office.
I'm going to nominate Jay Bemke.
I'm gonna do it again. Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other nominations for the Water and Light Commission? Seeing none, does anyone want to cast a unanimous consent ballot for Jay Bemke for Water and Light Commission? So why does that show it like that? There we go. We have second by Dean. We have motion by Ryan, second by Dean. All in favor, please cast your ballots. Or please cast your ballots, not whether you're in favor or not. That's 8 0 nays. Congratulations, Jay. The election of another person to serve on the Ethics Board for the term which expires November 1st, 2025. Why do we have one in November? Oh. They meet maybe twice a year? Are you already on there?
Is Tom on there already?
Yep.
On the ethics?
No.
I nominate Tom.
I'll nominate Patrick.
We have a nomination for Jay nominated Patrick. Any other nominees? So anybody wish to cast? Make a motion to cast a unanimous ballot for Patrick for Ethics Board. We have Matt motion, seconded by Dean. Please cast your ballots. How's it going, Dennis? Oh, the mouse is on a run. That motion passed 8 ayes, 0 nays. We are on to item 15, consider confirmation, Mayor Blazer's appointment to various committees, commissions, and boards, which is item, we have a motion by Dean. Correct. It's attachment 1 in your packet. They are all reappointees except for the Police and Fire Commission member who is a new member. Motion by Dean, second by Jay. Please cast your ballots. That motion carried 8 ayes, 0 nays. We are on to item 16, resolution authorizing the issuance and establishment parameters for the sale not to exceed $3.18 million, general obligation promissory note, series 2022A. That would be Tim and Phil. Congratulations, Phil. You did not get assigned to a committee, but we do welcome you here tonight.
They've all received the pre-sale report, so if you just want to go over that.
Oh, here we go. Sorry about that. I have a loud voice. Normally, I just, two documents for you. One is the pre-sale report, which was provided to you prior to the meeting. There's a corresponding resolution to that as well. And then today I sent out a document that looks like this. It's called the Rating Factors of Comparable Communities. I'm going to start with that and just kind of walk through that because there's some education always that's always good for members of councils, of village boards that are represent rated communities like this, like the city of Wisconsin Rapids. So Moody's Investor Service has had a long-standing rating on the city of Wisconsin Rapids. And so from time to time, when we're going through a lot of different bond sales for communities, we will do a comparison of different similar rated communities. And we prepared what you have in front of you today just as a little bit of an education. So you're currently AA3 rated. As you go through this borrowing process, if everything is authorized tonight, then at that time we will go back to Moody's and get rated again. And what they do is they rate this issue plus all the outstanding obligations of the city. So it's a combination of both that they are taking into account. And they look at about 12 to 15 key factors in that rating, and they vary greatly. And I've listed out on this piece of paper kind of, I think, 12 to 13 of those categories. Everything from kind of your overall debt burden, direct debt burden. Overall is when you take into account debt related to school, county, and the technical college, your share of each one of those. Direct debt burden is the actual city's obligations. How quickly you're paying off the debt. I'm going from left to right on the page. That's simply, how quickly you're amortizing the debt. And, the quicker the better is how Moody's will look at it. Debt per capita, what percent of obligation on a per capita basis. Annual population growth, annual growth in the community, not population. Fund balance, really a key one when it comes to ratings. Percent of debt service is as a percent of your overall budget. And then a couple of wealth indices that kind of tail on the back end of this, and along with your population and your total valuation. So in this case, we compared you to New Richmond, Wausau, because they're also AA3 rated communities. They may not look exactly like Wisconsin Rapids, but you have the same rating as both of them. Chippewa Falls is one notch higher at AA2, and then one notch below you, Marshfield and Toma. And we use those as comparisons in part because we have that collected information that would be available to us. Working with the folks at Moody's, they provide a lot of that information to us. So when I kind of look at this collectively, and that's how they will look at it collectively, it's just kind of interesting to kind of footnote a few things in regards to the city as it pertains to kind of your overall rating. And the three areas that I really will focus primarily on, actually four. Some you have control over and some you really don't have much control over. And that's the case with every rated community. One is your debt that you have control over. How much debt do you have outstanding and what is your projections going forward for outstanding debt. So if you look at after the current rating, overall debt and direct debt burden, the direct debt is what you that's what the city issues as opposed to the school, county, technical college. You can see you're at 2.27%, which just kind of fits within each of those categories. New Richmond's a little lower. You're right on line with what Wausau has. Chippewa Falls is a tad lower. Marshfield's a little bit higher. But you're kind of fall in line. Percent of the obligations that you're paying off in 10 years. You kind of fall in the mean there when you look at as a comparison as well. And a lot of times that'll really be dictated by what are you financing. If you're financing a new city hall, you're going to finance it over a longer time period. If you're financing streets, like you have done over the last number of years, primarily streets, you will have a shorter term. The other is growth, and that's where I think you can see clearly, when you just look at the overall growth in the tax base, where you have lagged as compared to other similar rated communities. You're at 2.2% versus you can see upwards of 9% in New Richmond and others in that 4 to 5% range. So you've lagged a little bit behind in growth, and that could be a reflection of a lot of different factors. But you certainly have lagged there. Undesignated general fund as a percent of operating revenue is an area you can control. What's your fund balance? We'll be talking about fund balance in a little bit when I go through the issue. But you're a little bit on the high side there, and I think what that does, being on the high side, is it offsets the fact that you haven't been growing as fast as some of the other communities. You're high in some areas and low in others, they kind of balance out. So you're at a pretty healthy fund balance, 55% at this point. And I know you're going to be using some of it to offset some of the obligation that we're talking about. The other challenging ones are wealth indices. When you look at the per capita adjusted gross income as a percent of the state, you're at about 67% of the state average. Kind of fall in line a little bit with Toma, but again, lagging behind Marshfield and a few other communities. So you could take that as you want. I feel at times it's good information just to kind of give yourself a gut check of where you're doing very well and areas that as a community you could benefit. One would be some economic activity that would generate more growth and more tax-based growth in the community is one area, but you are doing very well when it comes to fund balance. So that's not for any kind of action tonight, but just for your information. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Do you project any changes to our rating?
No, this issue is factored into our analysis that I just ran through with you. No, I don't. I mean, I do about 4 to 5 ratings a month, it seems, with communities. We haven't seen downgrades. We've seen one upgrade just a couple weeks ago. But it's really, they've been kind of in this affirmation period at both S&P and Moody's because of the pandemic, unwilling to kind of move the needle too much, understanding that there's some challenges that the municipalities have gone through with the pandemic. I would expect approving this isn't going to change your rating at all. It'll probably be an affirmation.
Thank you.
Other questions before I jump into the pre-sale report?
If you could clarify for me, please, the 55.19%, that's not necessarily saying how high we are to our debt ratio?
No, it's really what it's looking at is your undesignated general fund as a percent of your total operating revenues on an annual basis. So what it's really looking at is your kind of rainy day fund, your funds that are available to essentially offset costs, unknown costs that you may have in the future. So it's really just looking at that undesignated fund balance and comparing it to your overall budget size.
Thank you.
Anything else? Questions? Okay, well, on to the issue. We are looking at financing the 2022 capital expenditures, and at the same time, we are able to also pay off the remaining amount of the taxable note anticipation note that was issued back in 2020 for the Aquatic Center. So back in 2020, there were 2 different bond issues that were done for the Aquatic Center. One was kind of a long-term financing that was put in place, and the second was this note anticipation note. It was done as a note anticipation note because there was a goal of fundraising for that project, and then also there was the possibility of a naming rights that were being contemplated at that point in time. The amount that was issued was $2,035,000. It was taxable at that point because if the city would have realized naming rights from some organization, that could create this private activity that occurs in the world of municipal finance. And as a result of that, the city. So authorization tonight, there's a timeline in our packet on page 5, and if it's approved tonight, again, we prepare that offering document. We will be talking with Moody's Investor Service sometime around the week of May 2nd to get a new rating on, again, this issue and your outstanding debt. And then on May 18th, which is not your normal meeting night, May 18th, we will take bids, we'll assemble that information, and we'll send it out to the city, who will then distribute it to all the council members, so you have it as well. With a closing scheduled on June 1st, and it's scheduled on June 1st logically because that's when your other debt is got to be paid off. So on June 1st, the monies will be wired here, and Tim will wire out the payment on the outstanding amount on the note, anticipation note, and that will be taken care of on that day. So as we work through this process, working with city staff, we do look at kind of a financial impact analysis, and that's in your pre-sale report as well. So in your pre-sale report on page number, it's called table number 1, that is the outstanding obligations that you have today. So table number 1 is before you undertake this capital borrowing. It looks at your existing debt obligations, offsetting revenues, in this case, water, sewer, TIF, that offsets some of that cost, and then what is ultimately being levied on an annual basis for your existing obligations. On table number 2, we then put together the financing plan for this issue. And if you can see here, we have all the street projects and stormwater projects that have been identified in your capital plan that I know Tim went through with you a month ago or so. And then also the refinancing of that 2020A note, anticipation note, that would be financed. So that's the financing and how it all gets pulled together. Table 3 is the amortization schedule for this issue. Now, one thing I can tell you, and I'll show you in the chart a little bit, interest rates are moving rapidly. Not great, but it's kind of reality of what's happening in the market. Anybody who follows kind of what's happening in the home mortgage market, same concept. So we have estimated rates in here. I think they may be a tad on the low side. I mean, daily we're seeing the rates creep up, but we have covered that in the parameters resolution. Table number 4 then brings the existing obligations, and it pulls in, that's in the blue if you have color, and then in the kind of tan orange, you'll see that's this obligation, and it shows you the tax impact analysis on the far right-hand side of the page. Again, what we're trying to boil it down to is, what is the impact of doing capital borrowing to the average homeowner when you add in your existing obligations as well? Table 5, it looks at your overall borrowing capacity. So every municipality in the state, doesn't matter if it's Pittsfield or Milwaukee, have the same threshold. It's 5% of the total value of the community. They can be borrowed for general obligation purposes. In this case, you're at 49% of your borrowing capacity. And when you add this in, as you retire some debt, you're actually going to drop down to about 45% because you're paying off more than you're adding. And you can see that you still have residual capacity of over $30 million, meaning this isn't tapping you out. You have flexibility in the future if you need to take on additional projects later on. The last page of the pre-sale report shows a 3-year trend. I was in a meeting last night, a different community that showed a 1 year, and 1 year looked kind of ugly, so I brought the 3 year. The 1 year looked like it was just a straight north. So the 3 year gives you a little bit of like, okay, well, we're where we were about 2 years ago with interest rates, but we're nowhere near the bottom anymore. The trend is continuing. It's really a reflection of inflation, a reflection of uncertainty in Europe with the war, a reflection of Fed policy where they've come out and said they're going to do 6 to 7 increases in rates. So you add all that together, and it's really a reflection of what you see on this page as far as interest rates. So they are moving up, as you can see on that chart. So tonight, what we're looking for again is authorization to proceed with the financing of the stormwater projects, the street projects that were in your capital budget, and then the paying off of that note, anticipation note that is due on 6/1. So all of that is part of this issue.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions for Phil? Go ahead, Patrick.
On this first page here, you said
Yeah.
that there were some things that we could work on and some things that were out of our control. What exactly is it that we could work on to make Wisconsin Rapids in a better situation?
Yeah, I think there's 3 areas. One, you're really dealing with tonight. That is how quickly you pay back your debt. So you are at about 83% of your obligation is paid back within 10 years. So the maturity, the period of time you amortize your debt over is a decision. It's a policy decision made by the city council. Now, what you're trying to do, kind of long term, is you're trying to match the asset life with how long you're financing projects. You know, that's part of that analysis as well. But you're doing pretty well on that front. The second, a challenge. I'm not going to say it's not, but just growth in the community of tax base. And I think that's probably the fact that you've lagged is probably a reflection of the closing of the plant and a few other things that have occurred in the city. So, you know, being able to try to figure out ways to entice development and growth in the community is somewhat under your control as well. And then the last item that is really under your control is really that fund balance number. That is a policy decision of where you keep that fund balance number, and I think that higher fund balance that you have kind of offsets the growth, and that's why you're able to retain that AA3 rating. What's really challenging is overall debt burden, because the school and county, you know, if they issue debt, or the technical college, you have no control over that as a governing body. And the other is kind of the long-term wealth of the community. There are some very small communities, very wealthy communities in the state that have high ratings just because how wealthy the communities are. I was in one of those last night. They probably have about 2/3 of the tax base that you do, about 1/3 of the population, and they have a higher rating, And it's really just because it's a very wealthy community. So some are easier to control than others, but some are policy driven, like fund balance and how quickly you pay off debt.
Okay. So you're from Ehlers, and if we voted this down, you would not get the job.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And how much does Ehlers get of this loan that we're taking out?
Yeah, so we always disclose exactly what our fee is, and we've sent a disclosure to the city with our fee contract as part of that document as well. So if you go to table number 2, we've listed out all the costs that are associated with this debt issue. So table number 2, and if you look at kind of about 2/3 of the way down the page, it says estimated issuance expense. Do you see that? About halfway down the page, or a little more than that. So there's really 3 different entities outside of the city that are part of this transaction. Really 4. One is Moody's, and it's an estimated cost for Moody's, and you can see it's estimated to be a rating fee of $14,000. Above that, Quarles and Brady is the city's bond attorney. That's not us. They provide the tax opinion on the debt issue. They prepare the resolutions, and they help us in reviewing that offering document that I talked about that we prepare. So their fee is $13,000. Our fee is above that, $26,400. That's, we say Ehlers right on there. Down below that is the last item, and that is what's called the discount. So as these bidders will set up the bid, and we'll probably end up with 4 or 5 bids, likely. What we will have is the bidders set up the bid, the interest rate that they're going to offer on the general obligation notes, and they're going to also look at the discount. The discount is like a point on a mortgage. It's what they end up using to pay their desk to sell the bonds on the secondary market. That's a bid item. So that will likely come in less than that because it's a competitive bid number that they will come back with interest rate and the actual discount. So those are the fees that are associated with the issue.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Okay, since you work with a lot of other communities, if you could just be honest and let us know where is Wisconsin Rapids on if you had to rate it personally as opposed to other communities as far as financial strength. Like taking out additional loans, you said is one of the weaknesses, right?
I don't know if I said that. I said, that will be the case in any community. I mean, the higher the debt burden, the more challenged that Moody's or S&P will look at, the rating. I think I look at the state a little groupings. I work a lot in the Milwaukee metro area, and that's a different dynamic as far as growth. The Fox Valley I work quite a bit in as well. That's a little bit different dynamic. And then I do work for a lot of outstate. I consider this outstate a little bit. Outstate communities, and I think they have their own dynamics. The challenge with outstate has always been growth. Acknowledged. So I think that's where a Moody's or an S&P will actually kind of, they'll probably rate you a little bit less, rank you a little lower because you just don't have as much economic vitality by other surrounding communities and such. Where you have, again, I'll reiterate, where I think you've offset that is 2 areas: how quickly you've paid back your debt. You're on the high end there, and the other is that you have a high fund balance. And now I had this philosophical discussion last night with a city council in the Milwaukee metro area, who said fund balance is great, but that's taxpayers' money. Why are we keeping it? And they're a very highly rated community, and their fund balance is very low. And they want to kind of pull money out of the fund balance. And my caution to them is that's the number one trigger for Moody's. If you're drawing on your fund balance without a plan and a plan to stop drawing on it at some point, that's where you'll get downgraded. And we've seen that occur in some occasions. The other thing is the amount of borrowing capacity that you have remaining. There's a life cycle, and I've been doing this 27 years, so there's a life cycle of communities going through capital projects. There are communities that have very little debt, and yet they have a capital list that's enormous because they have had councils and boards that have just said, we're not going to borrow any money, we're not going to do any projects. Not on my watch. And yet at some point, all that deferred maintenance is going to come back and they're going to have to deal with it. So there's a life cycle. There's other communities that have just been very proactive in keeping up with their capital, and maybe they have a little higher debt burden, but their capital list isn't so enormous. So it's hard to just say at this point in time because every community is different where they are in that life cycle of capital. And I have other communities that are looking at $30 million DPW buildings because they haven't built anything for 30 years. So it's really a hard, trying to get to your answer, it's difficult to just kind of say, where do you stand? You have over 50% of your borrowing capacity. You have a very strong fund balance. I think those are real positives financially for the city. The level of capital you're borrowing, you're paying off more than you're borrowing. So that's not a negative either. Moody's will look at that. You're paying off more in 2022 than you are adding in the way of debt. So you're not layering debt on top of debt. You're paying off principal at the same time you're keeping up with your capital.
But we're still adding debt.
You're still adding debt at a lesser rate than you're paying off debt. You're paying off more debt this year than you're adding.
So we're taking out a loan to pay off debt.
You are. And you are also paying off loans on existing obligations. And the principal you're paying off is more than what you're actually adding in principal this year. Similar, but it's again, my point being, you're kind of keeping up with your capital list as opposed to just letting it drop off and maintenance being deferred.
One of the things you said was that there was an end in sight that has to do with our rating, and that we are paying off debt quicker. And why, if we're paying off debt quicker, why does our debt continue to rise?
Well,
But Bill, I can,
yeah,
I mean, the prime reason why our debt has, over the past couple of years, has gone up at a quicker pace is mostly attributed to the aquatic center, the amount that we borrowed for that, and also the East Riverbank Phase 1 and Phase 2. When you look at our outstanding debt at the end of 2021 of $29 million, 40% of that is attributed to the aquatics in East Riverbank alone. When you look at historically, the city has on an annual basis borrowed for streets, and then within those borrowings over the years,
city has on a
sorry, over the years we've sprinkled in something like bigger capital projects. One of them is the Centralia Center, the Aquatics, East Riverbank. Also, part of our debt profile is that back, and I can't remember the year, we had an unfunded pension liability at the state of Wisconsin for the Wisconsin retirement system, which we were paying amortized into our rates. We made the choice, and along with a lot of communities, because the interest rate and the way it was being amortized, you were never going to pay it off. We issued taxable bonds to pay that off. That's also in there. And also in there, $4.5 million is attributed to where we refinanced electric revenue bonds for the water and light, which is being funded through obviously the electric users are funding that. So, but when you really look at what we borrow for streets, right now the outstanding amount of that is $7.4 million, only represents 25% of that $29 million that's outstanding.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Matt?
So I guess I ask you this question because you're in the community, and I realize your job is to talk mainly with the people who want to borrow money. But my question kind of goes to the communities. And are you mainly in Wisconsin?
Upper Midwest,
Upper Midwest?
mainly in Wisconsin.
Is there some kind of a percentage of communities that have figured out how to balance the budget in a way that they don't have to borrow, except for those unforeseen projects that have to happen right now because we didn't see it coming, versus always planning for this is how we take care of streets. We do it through debt versus.
I would say I was around for the start of levy limits and well before that. So since levy limits was put in place, no. Unfortunately, if you're a city or a village of any size, capital borrowing is part of your world. And that's because of how levy limits works. Debt is an adjustment to levy limits, and it doesn't compete directly against your operating budget for things like police and fire. So under levy limits, for instance, if you wanted to fund these projects that we're talking about today, roughly $2 million in new capital, and you were going to do it under levy limits, you'd have two options. One, you would raid your fund balance to pay for it, but you could get away with that for a year or two, then it's gone. And two, you would have to have that $2 million in your budget compete against all the other operating costs of the city, primarily police and fire. That's by far your biggest line items. And that's just kind of the reality under levy limits. And so the vast majority, if not all, large or larger municipalities that are cities or villages will all borrow money. Now, yeah, most all of them borrow money for larger capital expenditures, for major road projects and that. What people have figured out is how to fund things like, capital equipment, things like police cars and stuff like that. That's a smaller ticket item, and it's more of a revolving kind of way, revolving fund to be able to fund those within your levy. But the levy, I don't know what your overall budget is, Tim. Your operating budget is, so you'd be competing, if you'd have to figure out how to pull out, in that case, a couple $1 million out of your operating budget to be able to pay for these roads. That's the challenge under levy limits.
So when the levy limit, where did the borrowing that is so necessary now, did that come in succession with the levy limits being put on? Or was this, it almost seems like one
We borrowed
because
plenty,
of the other.
we did plenty of bond issues before levy limits as well. And the reason being, most communities look at these larger capital items and think, why is the taxpayer that's here today funding this whole road today on that tax bill, as opposed to stretching it over 10 years and letting growth in the community fund part of that? The newer people that move into the community should pay a portion of that as well. That's kind of the theory behind borrowing for capital expenditures, is it spreads it out over existing taxpayers and future taxpayers as well. So that's why municipalities have always been borrowing funds for larger capital items. It ramped up without any question under levy limits when operating budgets became very much tied to just net new construction, which in your case maybe 1 or 2%. It's hard to fund other things besides just operating.
And I heard from Tim that if you could expand on a little bit, that the levy limits are there, but it's easier for the levy to increase when it comes to paying off your debt payments versus raising the levy to pay for the roads?
Yes, there's roughly 18 adjustments to the levy limits. Most are very convoluted, you'll never use them. It's intergovernmental agreements with other municipalities and things like that. The one adjustment that gets used by most communities is the debt adjustment. So you have your levy limits, just say it's $10. keep it simple, and your net new construction is 10%, so it goes to $11. The any borrowing can go above and beyond that $11 amount. So that's one of the many adjustments that are out there. And it falls outside, so it's not competing against your operating budget. And that's how levy limits kind of was established to allow for, it wasn't put in place by people like me that benefit from this to some extent. I mean, the reality is, if you wait till you see your Moody's report, if you go through this process, the Moody's report will say the same for every Wisconsin municipality, that there's tight restrictions on the ability to increase levies. That's every state, that's every community in the state of Wisconsin. So levy limits was put in place to really limit operating budgets from expanding. In doing so, they limited your ability to raise money for capital without going out to borrow money.
So it's easier than to say we're borrowing for roads, capital improvements on roads versus
Figuring out-
libraries or other things that are in the budget that aren't as, I mean, in my mind, the people that are paying the taxes, roads are pretty important to them.
Yeah.
So if you throw that in there as like, well, we need to borrow this, we have to borrow this money, otherwise you don't have your roads. And you got, it's kind of like a little bit of a scare tactic, like your roads are going to be horrible. But you're saying that that's the way it's been designed, is that's one way that you
opportunity,
can borrow the money and be able to raise the levy in order to pay for the debt.
Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Phil? Thank you, Phil. Informative as always.
Thank you.
So what are your wishes regarding the resolution? Patrick?
For me personally, I'm not going to add any more debt, so I'm going to vote no on this. I think that we have an excellent group of people here that are very out-of-the-box thinkers, and I think that we could find this money somewhere in our finance. Matt said that it's in there. I'm going with Matt's. Matt's referral on that. For me personally, unless there is something very catastrophic, I would never vote for a increase to the debt. And I think that free people are not in debt, and we are putting a large debt on the citizens of Wisconsin Rapids.
Thank you. I have a motion by Tom to approve the resolution, and a second by Jay. Is there any further discussion, comments? I guess a fair question, Tim, is if the council would vote no to the resolution, what would be the next steps?
Well, since these projects have been, obviously were approved in the 2022 budget, and obviously we've started construction, and it's built into, our 2022 budget with our own city crews. If we weren't able to pass this resolution tonight, basically we would have to amend the budget and figure out, how we're going to, fund these projects, whether it be through utilizing a little bit more of the reserves, but obviously, drawing down the reserves has collateral type effects, because when you look at your reserves, one, it provides you financial stability. Also, it's a form of cash flow because a lot of our state aids don't come in till that latter part of the year. So those reserves serves as a cash flow because your revenue, your expenditures are kind of evenly, incurred throughout the year, so to speak. But with state aids being a major funding source, especially in our general fund, we don't get a lot of those like 55% of them don't come until November 15th of this year. Also, your reserves serve as an investment base, that we have an investment portfolio which generates interest earnings, which offsets and funds operations, offsets the operating tax levy. So that alleviates some of that burden on the tax levy, is having a healthy reserves that serves as a generation of annual income in the budget. But obviously, if it didn't pass tonight, we would definitely have to amend the budget and figure out how we're going to fund the projects and that we've already started, so to speak.
Thank you. Matt?
Just so I understand the sequence of, Tim, so what we're voting on right now is the money, so we really already said we're funding the project in the budget that we passed last year.
Correct.
So really, we said okay to this money last year.
Right. That was part of the budget. It was in the budget for these projects, and the proposed, bond issue, and this amount was in there. Also, last month, that was one of the reasons why I put that on the finance agenda, saying, okay, we're kind of confirming that this is going to be the bond issue or the note issue. So, that, we were going to be before you tonight. I understand the differences of opinion on borrowing and things like that. And I think we've had some good discussions since the adoption of the 2022 budget about changing the process and really looking at, some of the concerns about borrowing for road projects. And I think that's going to be the exercise that we're going to undertake in trying to figure out, is there a different way that we can fund these projects as part of the 2023 budget? So that's kind of my understanding of how this was going to proceed. But obviously, you're the ones that have to vote yes and no. But if it doesn't pass tonight, we're going to have to figure out how to fund the projects that are currently underway. And also, one of these is a refinancing of a debt that was approved back in 2020 as part of the Aquatic Center.
Well, it's good to understand, like, okay, so I'm thinking back a year ago when I first got elected, and everybody else that just, a lot of returning people here. Dennis, you're familiar with what's happening, but when you first come in, the first thing I did was vote on, I think it was $4.12 million, $7 million. And it was all kind of thrust at me, but it was really it was already established from the budget in 2021, in 2022 when we voted on it. So what we're voting on right now is the budget that we passed in 2020.
That is correct. Yeah, because there's a lay effect is we pass the budget in November, and then usually early in the next year is when we have to go through the process. But obviously, approving the budget doesn't approve the resolutions needed to officially issue the debt. That's why it's brought back early the next year to get council approval to actually go to the market and sell the notes and or bonds.
So if we want to stop the cycle, or at least try to slow down the cycle of debt, it's kind of got to be through this, that's what you're saying, through this coming budget, which would then impact next year's debt.
Correct. That was why we kind of wanted to move up the budget cycle so we
Right.
could have these discussions about, okay, is there a different way that we can fund our construction projects? And, that was, that's the reason why, so that we could then have some of those philosophical discussions come up, maybe with some guidance for the department heads. So when they go to actually kind of compile their formal 2023 budget request, they might have some parameters on, okay, council set these parameters so we can change, we want to make this change on how we fund this or in the budget. And so they're aware of that. And so then when we get into the fall, we've already kind of had those critical discussions about debt and, how we're going to finance or fund, operations and construction projects.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
Dean?
Yeah, along with those same lines, what Mr. DeSorsi was saying, I just want to reiterate getting on this earlier, pretty much after this meeting is over. Obviously, this is something, as we said, this is something we've approved already for the most part. Now we're just figuring out, but we really need to move forward on earlier discussions. You had talked about in several meetings about moving up the timetable, and I think that's critical that we start reviewing this as early as May to start at least talking about where we're going with this and what to expect. So, thanks.
Just, can I just respond to that?
Yep.
We've sent out a request from department heads that they have their 2023 capital requests into us by the end of this month. And then basically on those, that's when in May, I'm going to kind of do a budget projection, which we're going to come back in early June and have that discussion of like, okay, here's kind of a projection of what the 2023 budget looks like. Now let's have those discussions and set those parameters for when the department heads go to compile their official request.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. That motion carried 7 ayes, 1 nay. We are on to item number 17, is to consider for the adoption, the action of the Plan Commission meeting held April 18th, yesterday. See, there's a lot of lengthy discussion. Mr. Kearns, I'll let you have the honors.
Thank you, Mayor. The Planning Commission met at 4 p.m. on April 18th, 2022 in the City of Wisconsin Rapids Council Chambers and via remote audio conferencing. Members present include Chairperson Austin, or Acting Chairperson Austin, Susan Feith, Lee Tao, Eric Dobbin, and Ben Goodrow via Zoom. There's a list of other attendees on file in our office as well, in the clerk's office. The meeting was called to order at 4 p.m. First item was the approval of the reports from the April 4th, 2022 Plan Commission meeting. There was a motion by Tao, second by Dobbin, to approve the April 4th Plan Commission meeting. The motion carried 5-0. Item number 2 was a request from CNC Steckbauer LLC in a public hearing on action to approve a conditional use permit to operate an outdoor food and beverage service as an accessory use at the vacant lot adjacent to 152nd Street North. The parcel ID is identified. Staff provided a summary of the process and the project, and also identified a few concerns that were raised in regards to the liquor license, the ratio of the outdoor food and beverage service area, and the adjacent rescue platform on the attorney office. There was additional discussion and answers by both the applicant and the commission about those concerns. The public hearing was called to order at 4:18 p.m. Speaking in favor was none, and speaking against was none. The public hearing then closed at 4:19 p.m. There was a motion by Dobbin to approve the request for the conditional use permit, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report. There were a total of 8 conditions that were outlined. The motion was seconded by Tao and eventually carried 5-0. The third item was a request from James Gannigan for site plan review to construct a Hawaiian tanning studio at 620 Airport Avenue. Again, staff provide a summary of this request. There was some additional comments and concerns about the previous rezoning that occurred on the lot, and some concerns about the site plan, the renderings, and parking requirements. Additional communication ensued between the applicant, staff, and the commission. Due to lack of information, again, in regards to the site plan, landscaping, and building renderings, the commission agreed to not take action and therefore postponed until further detail could be provided, and all commissioners were in agreement. Item 4 was adjournment. Motion by Tao to adjourn, second by Dobbin. That motion carried 5-0. The meeting adjourned at 4:32 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the applicants is in the audience, Mr. Steckbauer. Should there be any questions? Otherwise, what are your wishes? Go ahead, Kyle.
I just wanted to note, so you've got the meeting minutes in front of you that I just summarized, and you also have the resolution for the conditional use permit that the applicant with CNC Steckbauer is here representing. We are now starting to do resolutions for conditional use permits so that there's an official record for those actionable items. Thank you.
The motion by Sherry to approve, Sherry? Okay. Seconded by Jay. Is there any further discussion on the report? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. That motion carried 7 ayes, 1 no nays, and 1 abstention. We are on to item number 18, which is referrals. If anybody has any verbal referrals, but otherwise, please submit them to the clerk in writing. Seeing none, item number 19 is adjournment. So we have a motion by Sherry, seconded by Matt. All in favor, I guess, please cast your ballots. And that motion carried 8 ayes, 0 nays. Thank you very much.